You're all very welcome. It's a Thursday, and that means only one thing over here on MongoDB TV Cloud Connect. I'm Shane McAllister. I'm a lead developer advocate here on the developer relations team at MongoDB, and I'm delighted to have you join us live once again. We're streaming live on both YouTube and LinkedIn, so it's great to have you. And while we're waiting to get underway with our episode today, do make sure to drop a note in the comments. Let us know who you are, where you're tuning in from. We'd love to hear from you. And once we get underway, should you have any questions for me or our guests today, do drop them into the chat as well too. And we'll do our best to answer them live if we can while we're on air. And also hopefully some time at the end to take care of some of those questions as well too. We live stream Cloud Connect every Thursday, so do check our past episodes. We've done quite a number since we started this back in July, and keep an eye on our YouTube live tab on the MongoDB YouTube channel for our forthcoming episodes to see what's coming down the tracks. This episode is, like all of the others, is being recorded and will be available afterwards on the MongoDB YouTube channel once it's finished. So if you can't stay for all of it, or you want to recap and go back over some of it, it will be there for you to jump back into. But if you're not joining us live, unfortunately, and only watching this as a recording, we're very welcome, but we can't live chat with you. So do leave some comments in our YouTube channel, and we'd love to get back to you on those. Don't forget also to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. I don't know why you haven't done so already. If you haven't, please do. Anyway, without further ado, the Cloud Connect show today is all about Gen AI. And so if you've always been wondering about LLMs and RAGs and don't know what they mean, you've come to the right place. But before I get any further, let's bring on our guest, Sachin Smotra, co-founder and CEO of Dataworkz. Sachin, you're very welcome to this Cloud Connect show.
Thank you, Shane. I'm very excited to be here, and I'm looking forward to sharing what we've been doing together with the audience today.
Likewise. And I know that you've been doing some of this out in the open at some of our MongoDB.local events where you're having kind of workshops at our unconference piece there too. So I'm really keen to see how we bring this wider afield as well too. But before we get started, Sachin, tell me a little bit about your own background and how you came to co-found Dataworkz.
Sure. So I used to work for another NoSQL vendor before I started Dataworkz. I'll not share names, but it's all out in the open.
That's
Um,
okay. That's okay. We don't mind.
it's the NoSQL community. So I spent a few years there building products in this space, and before that, I used to work at this thing called Cisco WebEx. Most of us these days, there's a lot of stuff happening on Zoom, but before Zoom was a thing, Cisco WebEx was
I
an
recall, I
interesting.
remember it well. Yes, yeah. It's
And,
amazing how products take over each other in time and yeah.
yeah, I'm dating myself a little bit by saying that, but I just had to throw that out there. So I've been on the product management side for a while, but I think of myself as somebody who can get my hands dirty with code whenever I feel like. And I've spoken to a whole bunch of enterprise customers, and around the 2020 timeframe, which is when right in the middle of COVID, when Dataworks started, people were like, okay, what do we want to do? The future is going to be AI, and
Mhm, mhm,
I think that was around the time that Meta published their first paper around RAG, and RAG was still like relatively new as a
mhm.
concept. And that's where we thought that this is probably going to become a thing. And we found that there probably is going to be an opportunity where most people are going to be wanting to do something like this. And 2022 November, ChatGPT basically brought it all to the fore. And then all of a sudden, everybody wants to do something or the other with ChatGPT. So that's like in a very short, in a nutshell, the journey so far, and what we've been wanting to do here at Dataworks.
Okay, so founding a company in the middle of COVID must have been tough at the time as well too, correct?
Well, you get lucky. So we were lucky.
Mhm.
We were talking to investors before COVID hit,
Okay.
and they said, "We like you. We're going to fund you guys." And whether it was COVID or no COVID, they said you actually get some more time to go think about what you want to do and bake it to the level where you can bring it out to customers. It's been tough on the hiring side for sure, especially
Mm, mhm.
trying to get the initial corpus together, the team together. Not being in the same place is always very hard, but necessity is the mother of invention, and that's where we just found a way to not meet each other live, but a lot of not WebEx but Zoom meetings and
Okay.
online communication, be it WhatsApp, be it Slack. And here we are. We're right now at a point where we're close to 20 people, and we still all haven't been in under the same roof so far.
Oh,
uh,
wow.
little,
Okay.
a
So that'll
little.
be some event when you manage to all get together. That would be great to bring everybody
We're
together.
hoping it's gonna be one of the MongoDB local events soon.
Excellent. And you're the co-founder, and I love on the website, Sachin, you're underneath your name, it says a bit of everything. So your day-to-day for you as co-founder and steering Dataworks. Tell us a little bit about that before we get into the meat of our conversation.
Absolutely. So the reason I say I do a little bit of everything is because so if there's any problem with the documentation, I get on it. If there's testing that needs to get done, I'll get on it. If there is a message that needs to be created for a customer conversation, I'll get on it. If we're talking about going and showing demos to customers, or a customer is running into an issue, that's all being a part of
Mm,
the founder's job. But my background is product management, and I love building products. So the most of my time at Dataworks is spent thinking about like what we're building, how we're building it, how do we make the experience more intuitive, and especially around, given that it's Gen AI and the space is still evolving, it's very nascent. I feel it's a work in progress.
mhm, mhm.
There is an opportunity to leave a stamp on how people are going to be building RAG applications, as I like to call it, in the future. So just a little bit of strategy, a little bit of tactical stuff, and then any fire that needs to be fought. And of course, as a founder, you're always raising money.
Mhm.
So having those connections or reach out to the VC community is like a big part of the job as well.
Excellent. And let's, I suppose, before, as you said, and ChatGPT burst onto, well, the public consciousness at the end of last year, but obviously artificial intelligence and machine learning have been around for a long time. And and now we're in Gen AI and large language models. You could probably talk about this all day. You could probably talk about this all the way through this episode. But could you, for our audience who may not be super familiar with Gen AI and LLMs, could you just give us a potted history of kind of how we got to where we are today before we dive into your exciting demo and the presentation that you have for us?
Sure. So I think the way to think about this is I like to usually I'm the kind of person who's drawing analogies, and I think I read this somewhere and it really stuck with me that a car will take you from place A to place B,
Mhm.
aeroplane will take you from place A to place B. But the opportunities around the travel industry with when you're selling cars versus when you're trying to get stuff done with aeroplanes is like very, very different. So I think of AI in two phases, if you will. Like there's like multiple ways of skinning this cat, but it's up till like the 2019, 2020 timeframe where convolutional networks, neural networks, deep learning, there was stuff going on that front. That's what I call is like the first or the previous phase, and then there was the step function that came in with the foundation models like what I think LLMs is probably the second thought that
Mhm.
comes to people's mind. Chat GPT is the first one that comes to people's mind, and that to me was a huge step function from where the transformer architecture was used in a way that it hadn't been used before. And
Mhm.
and just from going from simple predictions to being able to understand natural language in a way that another human would understand became a reality for a lot of people. And then ChatGPT got the public's imagination. The open source community it was not very far behind. There's a bunch of open source models that have been released. And then I think everybody's scratching their head now on. I've got if I go to Hugging Face, like more than 100, maybe more than 1,000 models. Like,
Mhm.
okay, how do I make sense of this? I'm
Mm.
an enterprise. A lot of our customers are enterprise customers. I'm sure MongoDB has a lot of enterprise customers. So I'm thinking like, so how does this relate to me? What do I do with this? So there was initially a little bit of skepticism where like, oh, can I use this even for my for any of the work that I do? And then there are some CISOs who've come and said, you know what, you can do Chat GPT for all your fun stuff. You can use it for anything fun that you're doing, but you can't use it for anything work related as such.
Mhm.
So again, I think, like you said, we can talk all day about how machine learning and AI has evolved. I don't think I'm the best suited probably to give that talk. That's probably Professor Andoing or somebody like that who's going to talk about it. But I like the cars and planes analogy of like what happened pre-foundation model and what's happening post-foundation models, and that's the opportunity for startups like Dataworkz and a bunch of others who are trying to make this work for the enterprise.
Yeah, and I think, the speed at which everything has advanced so quickly or seems to have advanced so quickly, I think the one thing is that, as developers and we live in this tech world and this tech space, we're used to, essentially new products, new technologies, new platforms coming out. But I think above all, certainly from a chat GPT perspective, that caught into the mainstream. We see the media talking about it. We see newspaper articles. We see teachers worried about kids doing their homework using ChatGPT and not doing it properly. And that's, I suppose, what, to my mind anyway, sets this technology as nearly the next phase of the internet apart from previous things that have gone before. We've seen new languages, we've seen new platforms, but this is a whole shift in terms of kind of how we respond to this and what we build with it. So I want to, without further ado, to try and get into the meat of what you're here to demonstrate and show to us. So today it's all about retrieval augmented generation, and the large language models that are out there that you say, other Hugging Face and others have created and made, that we have access to, as you said, don't necessarily work for proprietary information, non-public information. So I think chatting to you earlier, you're going to start us off with a demo, show us the issues and the problems involved, and then jump in to show us the examples and use cases, maybe chat about the limitations, right?
Absolutely. So
Excellent.
without further ado, let me just go ahead and present my screen, and just
Perfect.
going to
Perfect.
share my full screen. and that way we are. So I assume
Getting everything.
everybody can see the chat GPT. So I just thought for this demo, what I would do is showcase like, so retrieval augmented generation RAG, if you're familiar with it, great. But if you're not, I thought, what's the best way to talk about this without going too much
Mhm.
of a detail with slides? So let me just do this. So for this demo, what I did was kept it very specific to MongoDB. Everybody here can access all the white papers that are available on MongoDB. I'm sure there's an easier way of doing it, but what I did was I just downloaded the ones that I was interested in. I just took a few random ones, and I thought, why can't I just build a question answering system that's going to ask questions of all the data that is sitting in these PDFs? So let me just open this one up. I think this is a thing about payments.
Mhm.
And I was thinking, like, so what can I ask of this particular subject that is not accessible to ChatGPT? And that's a classic example. So this was created in July 2023. And I thought, if I go in here and look for something like specific to customers that are doing this, so this information has definitely not been available to ChatGPT so far. So let's just go and ask a question around this. And it's a very simple question that I'm going to ask ChatGPT, which is like, what is the instant payment adopted by the 3 customers that were listed in that white paper?
Mhm. Mhm.
And I'm using the free version. You see that this is the beauty of the technology. Like, I don't really have access to the most up-to-date information. The
It's
cutoff
very
date
polite.
was
It's
September
very polite.
2021.
Mhm.
And I cannot provide details specific about Marquare, ANZ, Nexi after that date. And obviously, full disclosure, I just said, you know what, and I didn't know this paper was written in 2023, so I just randomly came across this paper. So then I said, so the easiest way to explain RAG is that if you wanted to ask the same question of ChatGPT, so what I'm doing here is going and asking the same question of
Mhm.
ChatGPT. The only difference, so there's a bunch of stuff that is happening behind the scenes over here that Dataworkz is doing, and I've tried to showcase that with a very simple example over here. From the same foundation model, the answer is different.
Excellent. I can see that. It's very clear and obvious on that. So, how did this answer get to where it is now through Dataworkz?
And this is the beauty of retrieval augmented generation there, Shane. So the PDF, so this information is all coming from a PDF. So I just will click on this PDF. This is the source of all the information that
Mhm.
was in there.
Mhm.
And I'm going into concepts over there, but there's like multiple chunks of information that was relevant to this. And that's all been coming in from MongoDB. So the way to think about this is that the reason this answer is different from what you see on the open internet, which is on ChatGPT right here, is because Dataworkz has actually provided context to ChatGPT, which is what retrieval augmented generation is all about. So what we did was we got this corpus of data from MongoDB. So I just used MongoDB white
Mhm.
papers as simple examples. And what I did was index them using the newly released MongoDB Atlas Vector Search. And then anytime we are asking a question of the large language model, we are basically building context from proprietary data and then asking that question of the large language model.
Okay.
So
So, what does that round trip look like then? So the large language model is adjacent to the proprietary data. How do the two of them interlink then to come up with this AI response?
So I think before we go into that, it probably is best that I start with like a couple of slides with that background. Just go
Excellent.
into like why we even built these slides out and why the technique of RAG is such an important technique. And what you just saw was ChatGPT not giving you an answer where it had no context versus the same model giving you the right answer because the relevant information was provided as context to it. So this is exactly the problem that exists that a lot of enterprises that we're working with are trying to solve. And it's not news to anybody that ChatGPT has taken the world by storm. But the limitation, and that is the limitation that I was trying to showcase over there, was it's only as good as the data it was trained on. It's got generic context there. And to address that limitation, there's a couple of techniques, and we do both, but we're going to focus on RAG here, which is Retrieval-Augmented Generation. And what I want to do is, like, in 2 or 3 slides, just showcase what actually does RAG mean. How do you make this like really easy and simple for somebody to understand? Then at the end of that, the last slide kind of shows the round trip, Shane, the exact question that you were asking. So the key concept over there is that we're passing additional relevant content to the large language model so that it can tailor its response based on the information that it is being provided. So what Dataworkz does is we essentially let enterprises build RAG applications on public LLMs, and I'll show you the same example with the privately hosted LLM as well. But what exactly is RAG? And we've tried to simplify this. So if you just think about at the highest level, there is data. So I just showed you, I downloaded data from the white papers that are there in the MongoDB website. Now, the white papers as such, I cannot share the PDF files with any large language model. There is work that needs to be done. The first part is what we call pre-processing, where you take structured data, unstructured data. In this case, PDFs, classic unstructured data. You might have a bunch of images out there. So you got to do a bunch of cleanup, make that data ready for large language models, or get it to a point where that data can be made ready for large language models, which is the next step, where you're essentially converting that into the vector representation. I'll talk about that in a second. And the last step is creating the context or providing that relevant information to the LLM based on the question that was asked. So each of these steps for pre-processing, like I think of it as like ETL for LLMs, the classic ETL, where you've got data sitting in different places. So in this case, I just pulled it off of the MongoDB website and threw it in a S3 bucket or threw it in a Google Cloud Storage bucket, just to make sure that that data is then can be used for whatever downstream consumption that I want. Most enterprises, that data could be in some cases be structured, sitting in a relational database, sitting in Google Drives, Google Docs, sitting in Box, could be PDF files, could be Word docs, or could be in any of the SaaS applications you use, like a Salesforce or a HubSpot and all of that. At the highest level, what you're doing is you're getting that data out, like it's strapped in a PDF document, putting some structure around it, doing cleanup wherever necessary, deduplication if needed, and then at a very high level, you just have information around like what's the identifier, where did this data come from, and what's the associated text. And I'll talk about text in the context of the conversation that we're having here. Second part, like, and this is applicable equally to text, to images, and to audio as well. Like, you need to take that data, and once you've got that, this is what I call the ETL++. So this is like the next level transformation where you need to convert that data into chunks, and there's a bunch of work that needs to be done there, and then also create the vector representation of that data. And the last part over here is the context for LLM. So I'd look at the slide as from the right to left, where a user goes and asks a question, just like I did of ChatGPT. That question is then transformed into an embedding that gets into a vector representation. You do the proximate nearest neighbor, k nearest neighbor search, and from your database, all the unstructured data has been converted into the vector representation, and the results are what is provided as a context to the LLM. How it all comes together, it's a nice fancy picture, but this is the round trip here, Shane, that we were talking about. So in this case, think of it as like your data is PDF files that are sitting in whatever club inbox or S3 or GCS. They need to be, the content, the text needs to be extracted from those. It needs to be converted into chunks and embeddings. And that's one part, the left side of the screen. From there, anytime somebody asks a question, that question is on the AI application on the right-hand side. available via a REST API is a call for creating an embedding from that, finding similar questions. If there is similar questions over there, then you retrieve it from the cache. Otherwise, you get the relevant
Mhm.
chunks, provide that as context for the large language model. And your large language model could be either a public large language model, which is any of the ones, choose your pick, or could be a privately hosted large language model. And we've got a few in the pipe that we kind of showcase over there. So let me just pause there for a second, Shane, and see if I kind of gave you an idea of the round trip out here.
No, you certainly did. And I suppose, and very clear in those illustrations as well, too. It's very straightforward and easy to follow. For me, and maybe for the audience, I know MongoDB launched vector search at our .local event in New York back in June. And obviously you touched on vectors here and there and everywhere. For the audience who may not be super familiar with what a vector is as applied to any piece of data, could you jump into that for a minute or two?
Sure. In fact, I think I had
Ah, very good, very good.
right. So what we the way I think of a vector is a numerical representation of any text or any artifact that you're working with. And with vector being available natively in MongoDB, the biggest advantage is that you can actually have both your data, your operational data, as well as the vector representation of that data in the same store.
Mhm.
Building semantic search directly on top of the operational data is fairly easy with the Atlas vector search. It's just um, few clicks here and there. And when we talk about everything that needs to be done to vectorize any content, that is the best option over there. So let me just see if I have a slide specifically for vectors over here or not. I don't,
Okay,
but
no worries.
um, so the I think of vectors as a numerical representation, an array of values of like how you would represent any text, for example. And the biggest advantage with vectors is that if you think of king and man as being two words that you're indexing, they'd
Mhm.
be closer to each other in some context than, let's say, woman and king.
Okay.
King and queen and woman and queen. Again, there's different ways of getting those in the vector space, and then depending on the context that you're using, you would essentially be able to extract the semantics of what you were wanting to do. So by semantics, all I'm trying to communicate is the meaning of what you were trying to look for from any piece of content there. Let me
And
just
vectors are key to why you can also manage images, etc., as well, too, because and the nearest neighbor search element as well. One of the
correct.
things that you had in a previous slide that I just saw a question from Kelsey pop up was you talked about cleaning up the data. And so Kelsey asked, how do you know that you're creating the best structure for that cleanup?
So that's where you actually decide for your data how you would want to clean that up. And what we're doing is we've got this concept. In fact, I should show you this. What we're trying to do is
Hmm.
use an LLM for cleaning up data. So here's a classic example of like there's punctuation at the beginning of this field, that airline ID field that you have out there.
Hmm. Hmm.
And the way to remove that punctuation is that you can go write a regex expression to do this. I personally never remember how to do that. And I thought, what if you could ask a large language model to do that for you and then show the results in line as we're doing this, and then have that transformed at scale, whether it's sitting in MongoDB, whether it's sitting in a data lake, or it is sitting in any other storage that you're working with. So, Kelsey, to answer your question, the way to do that is to have the tools available for you to define those rules yourself, as opposed to depending on something out of the box.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay, that makes sense. And I suppose a similar-ish question about chunking the data. You touched on that briefly in the previous slides as well too. Bigger chunks better than smaller chunks?
That again depends on what you're trying to solve for, and I think that's the whole notion of what Dataworkz does over here. So the best way for me to describe that would be like I just showed you the end result here.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about the chunking part as well. So where we are right now is in the Dataworkz product, and there's a bunch of AI applications that we support.
Mm-hmm.
So what I'm going to do is just walk you through, and we'll come back to the chunks question in a little bit, Shane, because that'll get covered in the demo as well.
Brilliant.
But what did I have to do to build this application? The first step, like I said, was pre-processing of data. So you could have data sitting in multiple places. In this example, what I did was if I just look at the extract of PDF data. So this was all PDF files that are sitting in Amazon S3. And there's around 15 files that I took. So these are the ones that I was lazy. I didn't like go put like hundreds of files over there. I thought like I'd probably work with the Mongo team to get this straight as a dump, as opposed to writing a script to scrape everything off the web. So I just took that, said extract all of this, and extract it in a Parquet format in the Google workspace in a Google folder.
Mm-hmm.
So to do this, we just come in here, brand new. I want to work with PDF files, and I'll make this full screen to start with over here. I want to use my data that is sitting in S3. There's a bunch of sample data that is sitting here. So we're actually connecting directly to, and then you'll see this is
okay. I see.
Mongo white papers.
Mm-hmm.
See the list of white papers right here. And I just say save, and then that's done. And then wherever I want to save it, I just go define the target. I just did all of this work just before we got on the call.
Mm-hmm.
And all you're doing here is extracting all the information from these PDF files. Okay. The reason we start with pre-processing is because you might have like the same information being used in multiple places. Like, for example, you have 5 different teams that in some cases you want a combination of the PDF docs as well as some web data as well as some third source of data. So all of this is information that is available for you to go then build what I call is the question and answering system. And let's just go to the one that we have available for the Mongo one here. So this is the reason I was talking about this here was because this is where you get all of the chunking information and that sort of stuff right here. So this is all configuration in Dataworkz. What you're seeing essentially is the ability to configure all of this on live data without having to write code. So the way we think about this is that this is a RAG application framework. So this is live configuration. So I'm using MongoDB as my vector database. You'll notice that my index collection and the place where all my data is sitting is all in MongoDB as well. The similarity metric here is cosine. This is a similarity threshold that I've set, and you can play around with these parameters. The chunks are also being stored in MongoDB. I've got we did this for a SFO meetup as well a couple of days ago. And then I'm using the word splitter there with a chunk size of 330 and an overlap of 45. So
you have a lot of configuration abilities within how you go about this.
Absolutely, Shane. So that was the thing that I was trying to showcase, that this is what the end result looks like. But if I wanted to build something brand new, it's right here. So you come in, you decide what workspaces you want to work with, and then what are the sources of information. And specifically around the chunk, so you can select MongoDB there and select what your similarity metric is, and then the similarity threshold. And then from a chunk perspective, where do you want to store your chunks? What is the chunk delimiter? And then all of the logic around the overlap that you want and the size of the chunks that you want.
Okay.
Embedding model perspective, there's a few models that we support. So you'll see the ADA model from OpenAI here, and then there's a bunch of open source models available here as well. Then you can also go ahead and configure your large language model and define the prompt for this. So we're working with a few. We've got Dolly here. We've got Llama 2. We've got a few. So we've been fine tuning a Dolly for showcasing a Dolly that is smarter on medical data, and then we're doing
Hmm.
something with the story summarizer from Mosaic and the story writer from Mosaic as well.
And tell me this, Sachin, is it hard to keep up with the ongoing numerous embedding models and large language model? Well, embeddings really, I suppose, more so than large language ones. They don't, they are a little slower to come out, but they're always being changed, right?
Right. And so the way we're thinking about this right now is we've chosen the ones we're very opportunistic there, Shane, in how
Hmm.
we work with customers on that front. And whichever model they want to use, so if they want us to connect with their Hugging Face space, and they can choose the embedding model they want. It's very easy for us to bring in a new embedding model. And what we're seeing more and more is that after trying out a bunch of them, most customers have, uh, at least the ones that we're working with so far, have been okay with the ones that we have. And we try to keep that list contained, because if there's way too many, then I just have to go find a large language model that'll give me a recommendation on the
Yeah.
best embedding model
Yeah.
for my use case as well.
But yeah, if you get choice paralysis, right? If that drop down is too large, and you're trying to get started with Dataworkz, you're going to go, where do I start? What do I do? We've got two more interesting questions coming in from the stream, and maybe it's something you're going to touch on. The first one is, what's the difference between the data being stored in MongoDB and the data in ChatGPT? Is it redundant?
Oh, so we're not storing any data in ChatGPT. All we're doing is like, let me just go back and like ask. So in this case, I was asking that question of OpenAI. In this situation, let me ask the same question of Llama 2. So what is happening here is, if I just go back to my slide while this is generating the response,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
this is the context that is being provided to the large language model. So we are not sending all of the data to the large language model. Only this context is being sent to the large language model.
okay.
And in the first instance, that data was sent to OpenAI, to ChatGPT. In this instance, this is hosted within our VPC. So the data has never left our VPC.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So what I'm trying to showcase over here is like, and you'll see that in this case, Llama is very different in the response. It says, based on the information provided in the text, are built on, by these three companies, are built on MongoDB's data platform, these financial institutions. So it's like, you see, this is slightly more in tune with like the DIY framework that
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
MongoDB was showcasing over here. So again, the reason I'm showcasing this is that the way to think about it is, there is context, and that is like information that is relevant to the question that you're asking.
Mm.
So what Dataworkz is determined in all of this is that what is the semantics of this question. Based on the semantics of this question, this is the relevant information from this PDF file that has been found, and then that has been passed as context to the large language model. Now, there are situations where you don't want any data leaving your enterprise. That's where, when I'm doing this with Llama 2 here, it
Mm-hmm.
is not going outside of our VPC. I asked
Okay.
the same question with OpenAI, and it's very easy to switch models. In fact, we're working on the next version of this UI, where you'll have the ability to see the responses from like two, maybe three different models in the same place, so that if
Right.
you're doing anything with knowledge bases and you want to compare the responses from two different models, you can do that in the same place as well. So probably will just copy this to make a note of this, because I otherwise will forget what this was. But I asked the same question of OpenAI right now, and you'll
Sure.
see a slightly different answer. But the reason why this answer is grounded in reality is because of the information that we have
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
provided as context to OpenAI.
Okay, so slightly different answer in this instance from OpenAI than what you
Correct.
got from the internal hosted one. Oh, okay.
Yes. So,
Okay.
but it's so that's the whole thing. It's directionally correct. So there's a bunch of other parameter tuning that you can do to get the answer as close to what you want it to be. But what we're realizing in all of this is that just getting something like this going, Shane, where you've got like, I just showed you with like maybe 10, 20 PDFs. You can do this with like hundreds, thousands of
Mm-hmm,
PDFs,
mm-hmm.
and that that's where like the ability for Dataworkz to be able to put all of this together and then give you the optionality to choose your large language model, choose your embedding model, choose like all of the configuration around chunks and embeddings, and also like the vector store that you want to use is the way where we are allowing you to compose your AI stack and build these
Mm-hmm.
applications without having to spend too much time writing code or having to figure out like the infrastructure piece behind putting a solution like this together.
Yeah, no, I mean, it certainly seems to be very, very simply laid out for something that's ultimately very complex behind the scenes in terms of how you process and even your UI there. It's working really well. I got another question, which I'm not entirely sure is something that we want to jump into at this point, maybe. So, how would you approach creating and storing the vector embeddings for sentence level similarity searches?
So for sentence level similarity searches, I believe there is I'd have to go back and check with my team, but there is a specific embedding model that we've used
Okay.
for what we are calling. So and the reason I'm calling this is that there is something called semantic similarity, and this is coming soon.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
this is exactly the use case of
Okay.
being able to look at two sentences from two different data sets and figure
Okay.
out which ones of them are similar over there.
Okay. So that would be, exact match and all of those type of requirements based on that one, perhaps.
Yes. So I think there's the semantic similarity, and I think that's more an embedding model question. I don't remember at the top of my head what that is, but we can obviously follow up with whoever's asked that question offline about the
Perfect.
specific one to use for that.
Perfect. And a quick one before you jump to the next step of what we're talking about today was, um, do you have some case studies yet, or public, I suppose, case studies that overcoming the barriers to application modernization for yourselves? Obviously, you have to, I think, maybe in my mind anyway, the use of AI tools is probably back where the use of cloud was a number of years ago. A lot of organizations very concerned about that, and possibly, similar concerns today about AI. So what are those barriers that you've seen in terms of talking with potentially some of your clients as well too, and how do you overcome them with those?
So the first one, and that's where I think I even in my slides highlight the difference between the public models and the private models. So
Mhm.
just simply put, the Q&A system that you see is this, and this is the biggest challenge that we've had of coming from our customers, that my data is extremely sensitive and
Mm.
my data cannot leave my VPC. So that's where having the ability to host the model within their VPC and not leave their network ever is one of the biggest concerns that they have. And then if you
Mhm.
can host the models, and this is where the release of some of these open source models, where you can use them for commercial purposes right now, makes it a really really interesting point in our space in general, where there's like a bunch of open source models that will give you, with a little bit of starting with RAG and then with a little bit of fine tuning,
Mhm.
responses similar or better for your proprietary data and for your specific domain than what you would get from a general purpose large language model that is available publicly via an API. So we're seeing a lot of enterprises spending time on essentially putting the infrastructure in place for being able to make something like this a reality. And
Mhm.
then
Mhm.
the ability to experiment with different models. I just showed you the switch between Llama and OpenAI, and we could have done the same thing with Dolly or any other
Mhm.
model that the customers are working with. And then the addressing their concern around data ever leaving their premises is the in our view the key factors that are deciding how enterprises are
Okay.
adopting this solution.
No, that makes sense. And just while you're on this slide, Sachin, what is there much of a delta between the private LLMs and the public LLMs in terms of, I suppose, the corpus of knowledge they have or the size of them, etc.?
So I think I cannot comment on the size, and then again, not every LLM will give you information about how it was trained and where the data came
Hmm.
from. Llama 2, for example, I think has not provided details on where the training data came from. It just says from online sources.
Okay. Okay.
So what you want to do in those situations, that's where techniques like RAG come in, Shane,
Hmm.
where they actually help remove the hallucinations from the large language model. So what I just showed you on the screen, where we didn't really go through the building of the application, but we kind of built the application. If you notice the responses, even from OpenAI and from Llama 2, the ability to trace back the sources were absolutely essential.
Mm.
And
Mm.
then the other thing that comes into this, and that's the part that I glossed over and I haven't talked about just yet, just going back to the AI applications, is the whole human feedback from any of these answers. So I think when you went into the screen and you get an answer back, let me see if I can just, okay, oops, let me come back here and say, and I had a bunch of questions prepared. And
That's
this
okay.
time
That's
around,
always
let's,
good.
yeah, we didn't even go past the first question because, so
Yeah,
this
I'm
time
sorry.
let's
The
ask,
comments were great in the side, and my own interest took over me as well, asking questions. So I have derailed your presentation a little bit. So I'll try and
not at
stick.
all. So I think the thing that I didn't glossed over during and the presentation always is like the least important part of it. For me, this is show and tell.
Mm,
Um,
mm.
you can give it a thumbs up, you can give it a thumbs down, or you can just be neutral about this. And
Okay.
that's
There's a
where
banner there at the bottom of the screen, Sachin. If you want to hit hide, it's
there you
just
go.
covering that. There you go. Now
Yes.
our audience can see that. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, so you can give this a yay or a nay, or say that this is you're neutral about this,
Okay.
and this is the part where we start to collect analytics, and we've used the term RAG analytics around this,
Hmm.
where for each of these, so for example, like let me just go back to the white papers, and here's a few questions that I'd asked about this. So I've only asked this question, so you'll see this. All of this is happening in real time.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
there's more coming, like where the most cited sources are and all that. That information is coming as well. But you essentially have information about what are the good answers that you've gotten from the LLM. So if I just go back to the reinforcement learning use case with this, those good answers are examples of reinforcement where you can use that as context for asking the next set of questions from the LLM. And what we're seeing is that once you start with such applications and you've done that for a couple of months and you've got some feedback from your end users
Hmm. Hmm.
who are the domain experts who know whether this is good or this is bad, then you start to build the corpus for going ahead and adding additional knowledge to your LLM and taking a base foundation model and maybe fine tuning that for the specifics of what you're trying to solve for, where even without the context, the answers from the model would be very relevant to your specific domain and use case.
Okay. And in that instance, could it, in a few months of use, maybe, and maybe some thumbs down, would you remove maybe content from your knowledge base as well, too?
Uh, Absolutely. So I think
Okay.
the thumbs down there is like the best way for you to go back and improve portions of your knowledge base which are either not generating the right answer, and that
Hmm.
could be a
Hmm.
problem from like, so I think I glossed over that part over here as well, that you can, on the right hand side of this slide, there's the whole user feedback loop, and then whatever feedback is coming, we can
Yes.
actually, so Dataworkz has a bunch of connectors, and I haven't done a very good job of walking through the full Dataworkz product because we're so excited about the Gen AI piece, and this is really the questions have kept us busy. But you can get all the answers recorded and the feedback recorded in any store you want, and then
Hmm.
you can
Hmm.
either use an internal application that we're building or one of your own, or you can just put in a simple thing like a Google Sheet, then go back and figure out like what sources are not giving you the right information, and then go back and add additional knowledge or improve the quality of content over there to get better results.
Okay. Okay. Excellent. Well, look, do you want to pop into some of those areas of Dataworks that we haven't got into yet? If you want to show some of those off before we take some more questions.
Sure. So, how did I start all of this? I just went into the AI application part, and you'll see that this is
Hmm.
all in preview right now. So, we're working with our early adopters and getting this going. But so you can connect with like a whole bunch of systems over here. So, going all the way from the cloud object stores to the large warehouses and Databricks, the data lake house as well.
Hmm.
My co-founder did a bunch of work on Hadoop, so he insists that Hadoop has its own place here.
Of course.
I don't know if I agree with that
It
anymore,
has
but
its own place at the moment. Yeah.
and then a bunch of SaaS applications. So you'd see like I was talking about Google Sheets, so you can have the output of the responses and what responses are good or bad recorded there as well. We've got a
Okay.
bunch of, and we're very opportunistic about the kind of tools that we're working with.
Hmm.
And then databases, obviously, I had set up MongoDB here. So if you wanted to
Hmm.
set up a new connection to MongoDB, just give it a logical name. What's the server, the username, password, and that's all. So all you need to do is like whitelist the Dataworkz IP in Atlas and vice versa, and you're ready to go. We do the same thing for, and then it's not just relational databases. We also have, sorry, non NoSQL databases. We also have connectivity to the popular relational databases as well. And
Other
then
databases exist. That's perfectly fine. We know that.
I was thinking more about migration use cases, Shane, where
Yes, I
you've
like
got
to hear that. Yeah.
and then data sitting in any of these. If you've got CDC streams, we can connect directly to those CDC streams,
Hmm.
and then or we can spin up the infrastructure for building that, and then streaming Kafka, and then that's pretty much like the ecosystem of. And then of course there's a few BI tools that we work with
Hmm.
as well.
Of course.
Ecosystem of where this is all coming together, and this is all essentially in support of being able to build the crown jewel here, which is the AI applications where, let's say you want to do semantic search on your user profiles, you need to go transform that data and build different things from it. So you can use Dataworkz for doing all of that
Hmm. Hmm.
as you speak. So again, I don't want this to be a Dataworkz demo. I think the
No,
RAG
of
use
course.
case
Yeah.
is the most important part. But yeah, so there's a bunch of stuff that we do, but essentially helps us put together that RAG framework in in no time with just a few clicks and configuration.
Okay. And currently, and is there any particular limitations or constraints around RAG and retrieval augmented generation? Is there anything that people need to be wary of or to keep a lookout for?
So the one thing that I've seen is that when you have large volumes of relevant text,
Hmm.
being able to filter that out to get the most, like, let's say there was like 15 white papers that were talking about the same question that I was asking, which one to choose, and
Okay.
then
Okay.
that's where the KNN, ANN comes in. But if they're all like past your threshold, then and your
Mm,
large language
mm.
model has limitations on the size of the context window, then you've got things that you need to think about and figure out.
Okay. So there's an element of perhaps deduplication involved there in terms of what you're providing it as the base information.
Correct. So
Okay.
there's and that deduplication itself could be deduplication. So you can do deduplication based on the actual text, which is one
Hmm.
part of it, which may not work. In many cases, the deduplication itself might require some semantic capabilities. So one of the things that we're experimenting with is like starting with semantic search, where you find relevant content and then choose the specific things that you want to use for asking LLM questions.
Okay.
For example, let's say Shane is a trusted source of information related to MongoDB. So any white paper that you've written, I would be more than happy for then to include that in my corpus of knowledge. Now, Sachin, I'm not that sure if he knows enough about MongoDB just yet, so I may choose to ignore some of the content that Sachin has out there. And then this is where the knowledge graph that is kind of shown on the left hand side of the graph of the Dataworkz block here comes in, where you can use information about how your data is structured, information about your organization to be able to derive some context to even be able to deduplicate the corpus of information that is available.
Okay, okay. So that's an important consideration and a potential, well, not a limitation, but it's not potentially going to be the best, I suppose. It's not going to be best use case, as it were, because you're not going to know which one to trust. Anything else, I suppose, in the context of, what it's not good for, or is it a case of, yeah, if you've got a large chunk of data inside in your organization that would be best served up via the sort of searches that you do, et cetera, as well too, then this is the methodology and the procedure that you should be chasing. I mean, for me, hand on heart, I haven't read most of our white papers, so for me this would be super good. I could go in and ask questions of what's in the relevant white papers and try and get them back.
Absolutely. In fact, that is so we're working on putting together some demos on that front, and I think we'll have to figure out how to get access to all of your white papers in like one single S3 bucket, and then so that Sachin doesn't have to go either write a script to scrape it off the website or manually do those, just like I did. So absolutely, there's lots of use cases around there, and it starts with being able to optimize the services that you're offering, or enabling a knowledge worker to become more productive, or having a support team, for example. I'm sure they struggle with information from like 15 different places, and a large language model can help them summarize that information in a way that would make a lot more sense than just having to go through 5 different docs.
No, it is. I mean, and I suppose the one thing I would like to touch on then, and we did touch on it briefly when we talked about vector search, we've obviously worked together for a while, in terms of what we have been building and MongoDB's approach to this. What's your viewpoint and thoughts there in terms of how, MongoDB plus Dataworkz better together?
So I start with the fact that MongoDB, with the flexibility of the JSON database, the flexibility to store the documents, change the schema on the fly,
Mm-hmm.
is the perfect database for modern applications. By adding vector search over there, you've basically expanded those modern applications to include all AI applications that are out there. And as somebody who's an enabler of AI applications, simple example being the question answering system that I just
Mm-hmm.
demonstrated on this call, having both the data, and when I talk about when I say the data, that from an LLM perspective, or for making this ready for Gen AI, you need the chunks and you need the embedding. So you need the vector representation as well as the text representation.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
having a fast store like MongoDB, where both of them are potentially in the same collection,
Mm.
is a huge cost saving when you're doing this at scale.
Greatly reduces the speed and the round trip, and obviously the cost of that, right? We're all very used to the world where our it's a consumption model, right? So it's bandwidth, it's round trip, it's data storage. So storing your vectors alongside the data in the same cluster as with the data. The mantra here in MongoDB is, the data that's accessed together should be stored together. And for us, that was natural to add vector search, and we were delighted to be able to get it out there at our .local event in New York. In terms of, I suppose, any parting comments, I want to put up a few banners for links for your sites and our sites and work that we've done together as well too, Sachin. We've got a really good bunch of questions coming in on the side as well. We've taken care of most of them as we're talking. Some of them are just congratulating us and thanking us for what we've been sharing, and that's certainly what we like to see. If anybody has some final questions, do throw them up here. Any parting comments, I suppose, on ultimately how to learn more? What can people get access to Dataworkz at the moment and start using it themselves, or is it preview for most, or where are you at?
So we are working on enabling self-service right now, Shane. And if there's anybody who's interested, just please fill out the contact us page on our website, and we will contact you and give you access to Dataworkz as well.
Mhm.
Soon enough, we will automate that whole process so that you can sign up using your email address as well. And again, we're an early stage startup, so we're looking at creative ways where the cloud costs don't start to become a burden. And the the space that we are in, we're still in it, is still in its infancy. Like
Mhm.
LLMs have taken the world by storm. Um, AI is the new electricity, but putting an AI solution together is a fairly heavy lift right now. And there's a bunch of companies, just like Dataworkz, that are trying to make that process a lot simpler. And I think we're seeing the emergence of new frameworks, and I've started using the term RAG framework recently to describe what we're doing, because you can build like multiple RAG applications with pretty much just a few clicks and having access to the right data, and not have to do any of the heavy lifting that is required to stitch together a solution like that. So the space is evolving at a furious pace, and it'd be awesome to see how what the learnings are maybe in 6 months from now, to the as more and more customers start to use this for solving real problems, and the fear of hallucinations of LLMs, and how to get past the ability to look at how an LLM has answered a question becomes gets addressed.
Excellent. And I know we've done some work together. Obviously, I mentioned that you were at some of our .local events and doing workshops there. We also have a blog post with yourselves as well too. So our short links, mdb.link, if you go to Dataworkz_blog, you should be able to read that as well too. Also, we were fortunate to have you on the podcast or the live stream from our .local event in New York as well too. Well, not you, Sachin, but as a Dataworkz. And for those who want to find that, if you go to podcast.mongodb.com, you can see all of our episodes. But that's a very recent one that we put out there as well too. So if you want to dig a little bit deeper or into that, or just have a listen to get more background, more info, I do recommend certainly to check that out. You showed the integration with MongoDB in the Dataworkz UI. So for those that are on the stream that don't have a MongoDB account, to leverage that integration at such time that you can get access via Dataworkz, just jump here. Again, another short link, but if you go to Dataworkz_Atlas, you'll be able to register there as well too. So please do so. We'd like to get everybody on board. In essence, as I said, this has been super informative. It was great to see the demo. I love the context. You took our white papers, you put them in the best traditions of all the great cookery shows. This was one I made earlier, but in fact, when you took us through the Dataworkz AI, it looked as if it probably didn't take you too long to get that up and running, correct?
Yeah, it was just maybe the longest poll there was figuring out what white papers to download and from where.
That's brilliant. Well, and I think that's the key thing, as these tools become easier and easier to use, and as companies such as yourselves, formulate the framework and the process behind which you can use these tools, hopefully it'll demystify them, right? It'll make it more accessible and more easier for people to jump on board. And as we had the question in the middle, what are the barriers to people adopting this? They're going to have to collapse. They're going to fall away, right, Sachin?
Absolutely, and that's where companies like Dataworkz are looking at making this easier and more accessible. And the space is evolving at a frenetic pace, and it's just amazing to be in the space, one, and then see where we are in like 6 months. Because 6 months is a long time. As far as
It is in the AI world anyway, and you've come an incredibly long way since your inception back in 2020 as well too, and with your team of, what did you say, it was now 20 or so on board?
yes, 20 people on board.
Incredible. And I assuming you're hiring, so people could go to the website, maybe have a look at careers, etc. as well too, like any high growth startup.
Absolutely, we're hiring, and if there's anybody that's interested, please feel free to ping me on LinkedIn, and or just get in touch with us via our website.
Excellent. Well, look, this has been a great show. I learned a lot. I hope our audience has too. I love the demo. I love how you took us through. And for anybody who didn't know, essentially what a RAG or an LLM was before we started this show. They certainly will now. So I do appreciate that. So Sachin, thank you so much for joining us on the MongoDB Cloud Connect show.
Thank you, Shane, for having me. It was a real pleasure.
Likewise. And for our audience, very much appreciate you joining us both on LinkedIn and YouTube. We do stream every Thursday this Cloud Connect show. We move from our tech partners such as Dataworkz into our cloud partners, AWS, Google, and Azure as well. So keep an eye out for future shows coming that way. If you're on our YouTube channel and you happen to be around next Tuesday, we have .local London, which is our flagship event over this side of the world. And in essence, we're going to be live streaming all day from that as well too. So please jump on MongoDB YouTube, MongoDB LinkedIn to see some other interesting guests and some other interesting interviews. But Sachin, I do appreciate your time. Thank you so much. And it's been great to listen to you and the story of Dataworkz.
Thank you.
Excellent. Take care, everybody. Good luck.